Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
Back in my 20s, I went out on a first date with a woman who asked me a question I'd never been posed before. She said, "How would you handle being with a woman who made more money than you?" To highlight how unwoke I was at the time, I was caught flat-footed and without words for a few moments because in all honesty, that thought had never crossed my mind before. Part of that was because I was in financial services in a pretty big job for my age, making more money than most people I knew, especially people my age. But on a deeper and subconscious level, I'd always just assumed that I would be the breadwinner in any romantic relationship. Not just assumed it, I actually felt like it was my duty, my obligation. And then I started to wonder, well, wait, where the hell did that idea come from? Where did this belief come from? And fairly quickly, I started to come up with some answers. My father was the breadwinner in our family while my mother made the choice to stay at home. Every movie or TV show I'd ever seen portrayed a man's role as the financial provider and as essential to his masculinity. And every movie or TV show I'd ever seen where a man didn't make money, he was portrayed as less than a man, fumbling through life, women didn't want him, or other men ridiculed him. And yet, in real life, I was surrounded by amazing female friends, bosses, coworkers who were crushing it financially. How had I failed to see this? How had I failed to upgrade my operating system? So this wake-up call from my date kickstarted an inquiry into my beliefs around money and how those beliefs had shaped my masculine identity. It made me think back to previous dinner dates where my date picked up the check and I would feel a wave of blood rush to my face, preempting the oncoming humiliation of being witnessed by everyone else at the restaurant as a man who couldn't pay the tab for his woman. I knew this thinking was antiquated, but it was so deeply ingrained in my DNA that I couldn't override the feelings of shame that would accompany a situation like that. Now, I've come a long way these last 15 or so years in unraveling that unconscious programming. Even though I'm still the one picking up most of the dinner tabs, I love it now when a date offers to treat me. I genuinely experience it as a gift, and I enjoy it if other people witness her gesture of kindness. It's no longer a source of shame. That's long since gone. So today, I lead deep inner work discussions with both men's and women's groups alike, exposing the blind spots of our unconscious programming, like the discussion we're going to have today about money and masculinity, that prevent us from connecting with one another and from feeling that deep sense of inner security that we all crave. So today, I'm bringing on a very special guest and a financial expert who has a bird's eye view of how unconscious masculine belief systems play out in money and relationship matters. My dear friend, Teri Kelley. So who is Teri Kelley? Teri is a senior vice president and financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. Earlier this year, she was named by Forbes as one of the top 10 women wealth advisors in the state of Arizona. In 2019, Teri hired me to do 4 months of deep, intensive coaching after suffering a massive panic attack after burning out. So we worked on breaking her free from drift and taking back life on her terms. And through that, Teri and I developed a deep bond and friendship that still gets stronger to this day. Now, in her work as a financial advisor, she oversees clients with assets ranging from $2 million to $30 million, and she has a unique perspective in how unconscious gender dynamics play out in some not so great ways when it comes to money. And by the way, with all this said, Teri is one of the biggest champions of men that you will ever meet. So I need to make that clear. And she's here out of compassion and out of service to the men in our audience. And you'll hear that as you have a chance to listen to some of her stories as well. So in this episode, you'll hear in Teri's words why so many male and female relationships fail or experience untenable tension when the woman earns more. you'll start to explore whether your self-identity, and Teri poses this question, this self-identity about whether you need to be the financial provider in your romantic relationship, or if you're okay with simply being the partner and providing in non-financial ways. We'll also talk about what happens when couples, heterosexual couples, don't reckon with these unconscious gender roles when it comes to financial dynamics, and why you as a man still may feel emasculated when your partner makes more than you, even when you know better and you want to learn how to upgrade that. And Teri also addresses the question of, how do I know when I should hire a financial advisor versus just going at it on my own? Enjoy today's discussion on how money affects our masculinity, featuring Teri Kelley. Well, today is a very special conversation because not only is it only our second delve into the conversation around money and financial freedom, it's also with one of my favorite people on planet Earth. You've heard me mention her name many times on the show before because of some deep inner work we did last year together. Teri Kelley, welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Good to see your face.
Thank you.
So Teri, you are Senior Vice President, Financial Advisor at Morgan Stanley. And this year you were named one of Forbes' top 10 women wealth advisors in the state of Arizona. First of all, congratulations. That's a remarkable achievement and well-deserved. Why don't you just maybe introduce yourself to our audience? Who are you? What clients do you work with? And what are we talking about today?
All right. Who am I? That's such a broad question. I'm the mother of two little kids and two teenagers who are my stepkids. I'm a wife of a wonderful guy who supports me in all my craziness. I'm an athlete.
5-time Ironman finisher, right?
Yeah, just kind of getting back into running now after the boys are a little older. And then my day job, I'm a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. I run a team of 8 of us. My partner and I are the 2 senior leads. I'm mostly financial planning work and strategic thinking for clients related to their tax situation, their estate situation, their money needs. And I try to fit all that into a regular week.
Yeah. And that's actually all of that you put on your shoulders was one of the reasons why we ended up meeting last year. And we'll talk about how fitting all that stuff into your life caused, I would say, a beautiful karmic connection in the work that we do together now. Maybe just one more piece of context would be, what's the profile of the clients that you work with now? And then what are some of the services that you provide for them?
Sure. Our clients generally have between 2 and 30 million or so under management with our group. The age varies dramatically. I mean, we've got 20-somethings who've been early successful. We typically work with executives and business owners. And I always say this, it's not that they're not smart enough to manage their own investments. It's that they have other specialties and other focuses in their world. They typically understand more than some people are do-it-yourselfers and some people hire advisors.
Yep.
We are the person you hire when you would like to focus on something else in your world and turn the money management and the big strategic financial decisions over to a group of professionals.
Yeah. I know that like one of the biggest decisions I made in my life was, like years ago, just kind of taking command of my own financial well-being. And we had a conversation earlier this morning with Brad Barrett, who is the co-founder of the Choose FI podcast. One of the things that he works with in his community is, so many of us just kind of think that financial independence is going to happen on its own one day, like that somewhere along the way, we're going to somehow figure all this stuff out and then we're going to be financially free. What he helped us to understand very clearly was, if you're hoping for chance or for all the stars to align at a future point in time, like you're in for a rude awakening. And it really, like the decision to stop drifting with money and to become much more intentional with your money starts now. And you and I, before we hit the record button, like you'd already mentioned some things that you have, some thoughts that you want to share with our audience about like where some of, your clients or prospective clients, you've seen them drifting and how we can bring intentionality back right now. So I want to get into that in a moment. Before we do, I think one piece of context that would also be helpful is how you and I started working together. And there was a fateful day, was it March 13th of 2019 that forever changed your life? Why don't you talk a little bit about what happened on that day?
Sure. The 2 to 3 years prior to that day, my team, which was smaller at the time, I think there were 6 of us at the time, had taken over a couple of retiring advisor practices. At the same time, I had had a baby and basically made the decision to give away my personal life and my athletic life to work really hard for a couple of years, knowing that it would pay off down the road. I woke up that morning at about 1:00 in the morning. I had severe chest pains that woke me up, and I kind of rolled over and I said, geez, I'm having a heart attack. And the one thing I know about heart attacks is, they kind of come and go, and I've got some time. Let me see if this is really happening. And I did fall back asleep. Woke up again at about 5:30, got up to get ready for my day. It was in the shower and it happened again. And I had these severe just weight on my chest. I jumped out of the shower, went over, laid on the bed, yelled out to my husband, come in here. And I could barely breathe. And he came in and I'm like, I got to get to the hospital. He's like, what's going on? What's going on? Called the ambulance, called 911, had 6 paramedics in my house, EKGs. They haul me away to the hospital. I spent the day there thinking I was having a heart attack. And I ended up getting out that afternoon, going directly to Mayo to meet with a cardiologist there who said, Teri, you're in great shape. What's going on?
Yeah.
And it turned out I was not having a heart attack. I was having massive panic attacks, which then could lead to some other things. And he really got on my case. It was the most beautiful thing because he sat me down and said, Teri, tell me what's going on with you.
Yep.
And I was like, you're the doctor, you tell me. And he flipped it around and was like, you have to change your life.
Yeah.
And it was a cardiologist who started this for me.
Yeah. Well, because when you found out it wasn't a heart attack and it was just a massive panic attack, you're like, okay, cool. I'm going to go back to work. You're like, great. Okay.
Yeah, I was at work the next day.
Yeah. But you would have skipped over the next step that you ended up taking until he was like, we're going to sit down and we're going to ask you about like what your life conditions are that led to this. And in that moment where he interrupted you from continuing your drift, what was the new awareness that conversation brought to you when he started asking you about the events that led up to that event?
I knew that I needed to change my life. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just change my life. And then I promptly go back to the office. I'm emailing all night. I'm up at 3 a.m. I can't stop at a stoplight without checking my email messages. It's just ridiculous. So I spent the next month or so trying to change myself, and I didn't have the right tools, and it didn't happen. And then I started looking for, and I still note that did not tell my team, other than my main partner, I did not tell the other people in my team anything about what was going on.
Yep.
Because there's a severe under disclosure of mental health these days.
Yeah.
This was an eye-opening experience for me. And 6 months later, once I finally came out with all this, when I was recovering and I finally had the conversation with my team, they were like, we knew something was going on. And then we all started to share, because we'd all been through a lot of trauma, I would say, around this transition and how much work we were doing over a short period of time.
Totally. And, the way the outside world I've learned has come to view you is like, and I've used this term before, is a superwoman. Like you're the rainmaker of your practice. Your wife, like you talked about, you have 2 kids of your own, 2 stepchildren, you're Ironman competitor, like you do it all. And from the outside looking in, it's kind of like this woman is indestructible.
I used to call myself an overachiever, and you helped me reframe that. I'm a high achiever.
Yeah.
Not an overachiever.
You are achieving exactly what you deserve. I mean, like I've seen your world. And so when you found your way to me, because as you were trying to figure out, okay, well, what does my life look like going forward? I know you reached out to me. You'd seen me speak at an industry conference. You got on my email list a few years earlier. You'd actually even sent like a few messages back and forth, just like small little toes in the water. And then you reached out to me and I read your story. Like you sent me this really deep email with like, here's what just happened. I've been burning the candle at both ends. I've been working 14-hour days, 6 days a week. I sacrificed my sleep to get all this work done. And the ironic part was when you had this panic attack, it was right after like you'd kind of gotten over the hump of integrating those two businesses that you'd bought. You just hired support. And we laughed about this later. It's kind of like the person who gets sick when they go on vacation every time. It's like you're running off adrenaline. And then when you finally have a chance to relax, all the stuff you've suppressed comes racing back. And in your case, it was a panic attack. I've had clients who've had strokes. Other people have had panic attacks when they finally have a chance to let down their guard.
Your body breaks.
The body breaks. And that's where drift hits you with the 2x4, the Mack truck. And fortunately, you paid attention and you've made some real big reconfigurations of your life. Maybe hit a couple of what those are, and then we'll get into some more of the money stuff.
I mean, the big focus in my work with you a year and a half ago was creating space.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was the person who, if you sat me on the back patio overlooking a beautiful forest and I sat there for longer than 30 seconds without something to do, I would lose my mind. Every moment was wasted if it wasn't filled with something. So the biggest theme, I think, in hindsight, after we did this work together, was that came out of the middle of it was space, creating space. And then some of the practices, meditation, journaling, stepping back and being the leader and not feeling like I have to do everything. You know, and I'm the person who I have no problem handing things off, but the things I like to do, I want to do. So I had to delineate between the things I really, really like to do and the things I like to do, but not as much. I'm the first person to outsource house cleaning and driving kids around and you know, things that I don't feel like are value added in my world. But then when the things that I like to do take more than 24 hours a day, that's really where I had to make some significant changes. And I gave away a big chunk of my job that I think was about 25% of my time to someone on my team. And it was really something I didn't want to do. And as soon as I gave it away, I was like, what else can I give away?
It's addictive. That's how it starts, right? You make that one big decision to outsource the thing that like, you know, that was clogging up your ecosystem. And when you feel the freedom of that, then you become the vigilant in looking for those other things. And the thing that I can say about you, just witnessing your transformation, when we first started this work, we battled over you taking like 5 minutes in the morning to meditate. And like your meditation would come in the form of like, oh, my exercise is my meditation. You know, I'm meditating in bar class. I'm like, no, that doesn't count. And, you know, I wanted you to start at 20 minutes. You whittled me down to 10. But what I've noticed, like after you broke through that resistance was like, not only did you start to really appreciate that new pace, you started to see much more clearly that the pace that you had kept up was not only not sustainable, but it wasn't necessary either. And when you slowed it down, you're like, oh, I can get rid of this. I can hand off that. Then you started to create that ease that exists inside of you now that wasn't there before. Like the tension has like a significant part has dissolved. And the space that does exist, you're filling it with stuff that you love to do. And it's just so obvious. And you become an inspiration to women as a result. You know, you turn this panic attack, which could have been something that was kept secret, and you've courageously spoken publicly about it. We've done, you know, speeches in, I think, Seattle and Scottsdale together where you've become an inspiration to women. And even when I interviewed you on a different podcast, specifically for women's group, some of your male clients found you and said, oh, like, shit, Teri, I can totally relate to that too. And what you thought may have been, hey, someone may see me as weak, ended up, you know, finding connection and strength in your story.
Yep. The thing I think I've learned from all this is so many people can relate to this in some form, to the burnout that I went through. And we should be talking about it because we're all humans, you know, and we all go through this at some phase and some capacity. And then it also helps you be held accountable. People know about this and they see me going over the edge. They're going to say something.
Hell yeah. I will. You know, I'll be up your butt in a heartbeat about that. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. And that system of accountability is so useful in not drifting, right? Like drifting pre this work caused Teri to have a panic attack. Drifting now is, oh, I've had a few sleepless nights. I know what's happening to me now. Or, oh,
and I can see it.
You could see it in a heartbeat, like, or I'm at that stoplight again and I feel that compulsion to bang out like 2 productive emails. And it's like, So now you catch yourself much quicker before ending off like in a totally different trajectory, which is awesome. I wanted to make sure our audience heard your story because like you are on that inner work path and like I've just seen your business and your personal self flourish. Let's actually take a turn into something I hadn't anticipated talking about today, but it may actually fill our entire time today. We'll see. This is something that you brought up. Men and money, and when women in their lives end up making as much as or more money than the men in their lives. So not only are you a rainmaker in your home, you also are surrounded by plenty of women who have jobs like you, careers like you, who make way more money than the men in their lives. And you also have clients that are like that. And there's some really interesting dynamics that you've had a chance to witness personally and also from a professional perspective. Why don't you just kind of like take the floor on that and start sharing what insights that you have and we'll dig in a little bit more deeply.
You know, there's a lot of, this is a little off, there's a lot of data too on how much money is enough. And I've seen relationships break up over too much money because it wasn't handled the right way, or because, you know, now I've got so much that I've got power and I've got power over you. And I've got so much power that maybe I need more than you, my partner. And I've seen these things happen too. That's a different topic, but it's been interesting I've been doing this started in 2003 and then 5 years in finance before that. So I've been in finance for a long time, but been working with people. And I've seen a lot of evolution in, you know, working with younger, like 30, 40 something couples who have big jobs, who then, as their careers evolve, I've seen women become more successful than the men. I've seen that work in relationships. I've seen that not work in relationships. It's a conversation that couples have to have. And it doesn't always happen. The conversation doesn't always happen until you get there, because it's not like, you know, you sit down at 25 and say, hey, I'm going to make more money than you, or I need you to make more money than me. But so I've seen it evolve in a good way, where I've seen the decision where a spouse stops working, a husband stops working, you know, because the wife's career has taken off and they're struggling keeping the family together and getting, you know, you can hire so much help. And then if someone's traveling all the time, I've seen that split up couples where the husband is like, I never meant to be with someone who was on the road all the time. I realize you're making $800,000 a year and you're getting all this stock and all these things are happening, but I don't want that. And I've seen that split people up. And I've been in situations where, you know, half the time I'm a counselor.
Sure.
I've seen situations where I end up talking to the husband more because the wife is traveling all the time. And then he starts like putting out his angst about the situation. I think the first time that happened, I didn't really know how to react to it, but I am better now. I get involved and I coach that spouse or that partner on, you know, think about it this way, or if you're having issues with this, make sure you're talking about it. You know, so I encourage more dialogue, where I think initially when I was younger and doing this, there was fear. Like, I don't really know what to do with this. My job's to manage your money. Stop talking. You know?
What's emerged is this dynamic of, you know, women are making more and more money. And you have some statistics that I'd love for you to share because, you know, even 20 years ago, the numbers were way different. So what was the stat that you just shared before we started recording?
So in the 60s, 4% of women made more than their partners.
4%.
In 2016, it was 38% of women made as much or more. And today, only 4 years later than that, it's 50% of women are making as much or more.
That blows me away. The jump between the 60s and 2016 doesn't shock me as much as what's happened over the last 4 years, where it went from 36% to 50%. Like, that is a massive shift.
Yeah. And I encourage, especially, and you know, the guys that you're working with who are probably vary in age. Yeah, I assume you've got younger, you know, 20 somethings, and then you've got some older men trying to reform their situations, or they've gone through a divorce, or, you know, they've been through times and they're trying to kind of regenerate themselves. I encourage the men on this podcast to respect the woman who makes more money than you. And I'll share my own. I mean, I was in a relationship in my early 20s that, you know, and I was successful pretty early on, and it didn't go really well. And he was worried about what his family would think, and how that was going to work. And
Yeah.
I just was like, what are you talking about? I mean, and that relationship didn't work out. And I have to say that that's a big reason why is I felt a little bit smushed in what I was allowed to be. And as I've gotten older, I've encouraged my single men friends to really think through, because they be in relationships with these great women and then they break up. Relationships break up. What's going on? And the men have to realize, in my opinion, this is my own little theory here. Do you want to be a provider? Do you need that where you need to be a provider as part of who you are? Or do you want to be a partner,
Right,
where you're okay with someone that you're not providing for? There's really a distinction between, are you provider or not?
yeah,
And either of those is fine. But the earlier you can acknowledge which one of those you are, the better your relationships are going to be, and the better you're going to handle money situations, especially when you're younger and you and your partner have not yet figured out who's going to be the main provider. You're not sure yet because you don't know where your careers or where your life is taking you.
yeah. I mean, you're bringing up such a huge point that we need to dive into this, and it's around men, money, and identity, right? So like this question you pose about, do you need to be a provider in your relationship, or can you be a partner? And I know that one of the unconscious beliefs that I had growing up is, of course, like as a man, I have to provide. That comes with the territory. That means being able to generate enough income that all of our expenses, including what you may need in my relationship and our kids and their future college tuition and all the other things, like, my parents' health, your parents' health, that was my responsibility.
Right. And I would challenge that. The word provide doesn't always have to be financial.
That's right. Yep.
And so provide could be, can you please take the kids to school this morning? And this is a female conversation too, because do I need to be provided for? Or do I want to be more independent than that? And so this is a two-way conversation, but it's a conversation that breaks people up, period.
Yes.
If you're not on the same page with it.
Yeah. Well, so let's go even deeper on it. We talk about on the show that drift is the number one enemy to living a powerful life. One of the key contributors of drift is fear. And one of the biggest unconscious fears that men have that they don't even recognize as running their life is this fear of emasculation.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what we mean by that is, Esther Perel has said, and I quote her often, I quote her in my TEDx talk, that masculinity is not something that men just seem to be given. It's something that we have to earn and then vigilantly maintain over the course of life's actions, right? Like men can lose their man card for not finishing their beer. Men can lose their man card for not closing on a woman at the bar. Men can lose their man card if they have a woman boss that talks down to them. Like all of these things that other men will make fun of him for. And guys don't even recognize because it's so ubiquitous and we're so used to defending ourselves that we don't even realize that that's a game that we're playing. And so like one more area to bring this up is, and I know that like you and Tyson, your husband now, like have dealt with this too, because he's also a financial advisor. He's quite successful in his own regard, but like, you're one of the top of the top. And so he's had his balls busted by other men, other advisors in the business who have been kind of like, oh, Teri wears the pants. This is something that guys can feel emasculated around. So I'm just curious, as you hear all of that in your own personal experience, how have you and Tyson navigated that?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because we talk about this a lot. Someone in his office will say, oh, well, look at Teri, she's above you in the rankings, or they'll make some joke to him because it's way cooler for guys to be at the top of the list. I mean, it's the masculine thing that you're talking about. It's our culture to like razz some guy whose wife might be successful. And he'll look at them and go, what are you talking about? I hear you all the time bitching about how your wife is spending too much or how she doesn't get it, or about how she, and then so that immediately flips the conversation. And the guys are always like, oh, okay. And it's this funny thing that has happened a number of times. And he's like, these guys, they're just jealous.
Yeah.
Like he comes back around to like, they just wish they were in this situation.
Yeah. And I think that what it comes down to is, every man wants to feel valuable, and he wants to feel valued, like his contributions matter. And oftentimes it can be over the course of decades, caked on that like my valuable contributions are my job, my money, my income, that kind of thing. And when that's no longer needed because Teri Kelley here is, tops of the top, it's like, well, then what is my identity inside of this relationship? Where do I provide value? And I know you said there's so many different ways to provide, beyond just the finances. But for many guys, the idea of picking up the kids at school or providing with household chores
or making dinner. Like Tyson has been making lately because we're working remote right now, and he will come in here at like 11:30 with like a plate of broccoli with cheese on it. And I'm like,
ooh,
oh my God, you're amazing.
You're a hero. I want that.
Yeah. And I'm like, it's the little things like that he has gotten so good at. And we've had a lot of conversations over the years about who am I? Like, I'm not the provider. I'm not the provider. What role do I even have? And we've gone through that. I mean, when we first dated, we had a joint bank account that we would put money into to fund our dinners and travel and things that we like to do together. And we based on our income differential. So he was making a lot more than me. It's like, if I'm making 25%, he's making 75%, we would fund this account every month. And that was how we did our things. And then over time, I made more. Well, I mean, we got married and we stopped doing that account thing, but it was something we had that we actually struggled with for a period of time where, I mean, it was enough to split us up for a while, and it was significant, but we came back around to it.
And that's why it's so important that we're talking about this, Teri. It's like, the fact that, let's say, a woman's success could be the thing that splits up a relationship in this day and age because a man is unable to find his own sense of value or worth inside that relationship it is a travesty, I would say. Mm-hmm. And I can understand, I understand completely where it comes from, right? Because like as guys, there's nothing worse than feeling emasculated. It's truly almost like an assassination of your soul, which is why it's incumbent upon men to wake themselves up. I'm here, banging on the drum to wake guys up to, hey, this is a fear that's running your life. One of the things I have ultimate respect for Tyson for is, you've shared that in previous relationships before, entering a relationship with you, he was the provider, and the women that he dated loved the fact that he was so successful, that could take him to these nice places. I know he's a car aficionado, has these different cars, and he would be praised and valued. And now when that is absent to a large degree, because now you enter the picture, the fact that he was, I'm sure there's a rocky road, but like he was able to work through and grow to find his sense of meaning and value inside that relationship. And kudos to you for having, the patience and the compassion and all the other stuff. I'm sure you weren't perfect along the way either.
No.
But right. But to work through that together to end up in a much better place where it's like, I love hearing the story that you don't have to shrink your success. He loves blowing the megaphone on your success.
He's my biggest fan. I mean, he's constantly saying, you've got to hear what Teri just did.
Yeah.
Or I just wanted a recognition for moms. He's like touting it everywhere. I mean, he truly acknowledges that stuff, and not in a way where he's trying to, but he really, really, really does get it. So one other thing that I have a theory on, I'm going to throw this out there. I have a theory on this. Okay. I grew up in a family where my mother worked until she retired. My two grandmothers were working women. My husband's wife, I like that. My husband's mother worked until, she was 60, whatever. And then his two grandmothers were working women.
Yep.
Okay. So we came together in a way where he expected me to have a career.
Yep.
And I have always expected to be successful. And I have never felt a guilt for not being a stay-at-home mom. I do not want to be a stay-at-home mom, and I don't carry that guilt. And he doesn't carry an expectation. And so that has been, I think, pivotal because we can talk about that. And that's a theory that I have. My girlfriends whose mothers didn't work, or my girlfriend relationships where their husbands' mothers didn't work, it's more of a struggle, and it's more of a guilt and a reframing of how your brain works. I've been kind of just in my head gathering data on this for years. I don't have anything formal, but there's something to that, because the men who grew up in a situation where their fathers were the sole provider struggle more with women who are successful.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So I bring that up because I think people just need to be aware of their own biases.
Yes.
Their own unconscious biases that are there, and allow themselves to work through it and not just assume what their brain tells them back there.
You've again pulled back the curtain on drift here. So I would just ask the men who are listening right now, do an inventory of like, who were the prominent women figures in your life growing up, right? If mom, grandmoms, aunts, whoever, older sisters, were they workers, right? Like, were they the ones out building the careers like you just described? Or were they more stay at home and carrying around the house? And then how has that shaped your perception of what women are supposed to do, what men are supposed to do, who's supposed to earn, and start to look at like how those behaviors and those beliefs have shown up in your life, in your relationships, what's working and what's not. That's a really powerful insight, Teri. Thank you for that.
So let me throw something else out there.
Keep it coming.
So my single guy friends who meet this wonderful new woman in their life, flying her around, taking her to dinners, like wowing her. And then as the relationship kind of settles down and they want her to pay more, it's like you go through this stage of awe in the beginning of a relationship, which is setting a tone. And then when that tone shifts and you get a little less settled with it, and you were like, gosh, I do pay all the time. And you're shifting from, I'm the one always doing and I'm the one always providing, into a situation where you're expecting them to be more partner. You've totally messed with their heads.
Totally.
And you can't be surprised when those relationships go south.
I've seen that over and over again.
All the time.
Teri, like there's one man I'm thinking about, like specifically from, my working in the 15 years in corporate, who did exactly that. His pattern was to wow like a new woman with all of his money, all of his connections, all of the travel. And he needed that up front. I've certainly done this to an extent too, where it was like, I wanted to come off as, this white knight on a horse. And like, so I would blow you away early on, but setting that standard. And then I would see like this guy's relationships later on, and he would be resentful and angry that all she did was spend, or all she wanted to do was go to Monaco, and it became an expectation of hers because he had set up the system that way. And of course, like she was complicit too. Like she'd been a willing partner in that as well. But like, you don't really have the right to be resentful later on when you set the expectation like that. And so that's great.
And I bring that into relationships with money too, because it's that same, I'm always paying the bill. And then I'm upset with you for not ever wanting to pay the bill. Or, honey, I don't want you to work. I mean, just being conscientious of what you're looking for. I mean, I've seen situations where it's like, yep, well, I'm the one that earns all the money, so I get to decide. These are collective decisions. They need to be made collectively for relationships and for finances to be successful.
I'm thinking about, it wasn't that long ago, Teri, maybe like 10 years ago or something like that, where if I was at dinner with a woman and then she took the bill and then we were at a restaurant in a public place, I remember feeling a sense of emasculation. I remember being that way, and I was just kind of like, I could feel my face get flush. I would like look around, seeing if anyone else looked at it and were judging me for it. And now, I went out to dinner with someone recently and she paid for the bill, and I was just like so appreciative of that, like that gesture, because I'm the one who typically mostly pays. And she was like, no, tonight, like this is on me. And so like to see my own maturation around like some of these like old beliefs, old programming is super important, and it's liberating. She can be more of herself. I can be more of myself.
Right.
Yeah. I've got something interesting that's totally off the wall. You're not prepared for this. Okay. So let me set the stage here. When I was in financial services, like I've said many times on the show, 15 years, made good money, predictable money, saved the hell out of my money. I learned how to save, and I've got a nice nest egg. come into the entrepreneurial world, and the world is much less predictable here, right? For these past 4.5 years, I've wanted to play. I've wanted to figure out my business. I've definitely started and stopped different things. I was one-on-one coach and then I stopped one-on-one coaching. There's corporate keynote speaking. The events of the last few weeks are probably going to, dry that up quite a bit. And Teri's laughing because she knows what I'm talking about. If you guys have listened to recent episodes of the show, you'll know what I'm talking about too. So what I've found over these last 4 years is like, there's been some stuff coming up for me around money that I've never experienced before. Because my whole life, my money has gone in one direction, up, always. And these last few years, there has been some dips, and also not being able to save away the money that I've thought of, because I've also invested in a full-time employee. So recently, I decided to get much more clear and conscious around some of these money hangups. And I did this thing for the past year where anytime I got a paycheck, I would put like 5 or 10% of cash into like this folder. And I'm sitting here with, you can see this, Teri, these are hundreds. Okay.
This is your folder.
Yeah, this is my folder. So by the way, by the time this episode airs, this is going to be in the bank. So anyone who's thinking about robbing my apartment, can you just take a look at this, Teri? These are hundreds. How much do you think this is right here? So,
gosh,
I'm fanning out.
25,000.
Pretty damn close. Yes, 21,500. So she is.
I'm a money person.
You are a money person. Well done. I was expecting you to get it within $100, but close enough.
You can't deposit more than 10,000 at once into the bank, or they start. Yeah, okay, you know all that. Call me later. We'll talk.
I've seen The Sopranos. Yeah. Tony Soprano taught me that lesson. They'll flag me. Well, what's happened is I decided to bring this out, and this stack of cash has sat on my counter and kitchen table for the past 2 weeks. I've looked at it. I've meditated with it. I've felt into the power of it. I've recognized the sources that it came from. Some days this money feels like a lot of money. It's like, oh, wow, think about all the things that can be bought with this. Other days it's like, that's not even a month's worth of my expenses, and how many speeches I have to do to, like there's a couple speeches that I've actually had a chance to really feel into all of the feels of money, like the scarcity and the abundance of it. And I'm just curious, you work and live in the world of money. What are some awarenesses that you've had that maybe we could learn from and that could help us make better money decisions going forward?
Yeah. Gosh, I think one of my biggest ones is it's not about what you make, it's about what you save. I mean, I know people who make 4 million a year and have nothing to show for it.
Really? 4 million a year?
And then I know who just are spenders, and they also feel like they're going to make it forever. So there is no regard for future. It's just really just living in the now. That puts me in a panic because that's not who I am. And then I know people who live on $50,000 and live well and save.
Yep.
So the dollar figures and the number of zeros is so relative. I mean, my parents were school teachers. Okay. Both of them school teachers. My dad was a science teacher. My mother ended up being a principal of an elementary school, but she was an elementary teacher and administrator. They saved $1 million during their working years.
How did they do that?
Just $100 at a time. And I tell this story. I mean, I give education meetings to 401k participants who make between, 20,000 and mostly 20,000 and 150,000. Usually it's kind of the participants that are listening to my talks. And you don't have to save 10,000, 20,000 at a time. You can save $100 at a time, $50 at a time, and do that for 30 years, and it'll make you a millionaire.
Yep.
That's one of the big philosophies that I think is completely understated. It's about time and consistency. So that's for, just be aware that you don't have to have $50,000 bonus every year to save money. Make it a habit. And when, one of the lessons that I encourage my parents who have kids who are in high school, college, kind of getting out on their own, is make sure they're contributing to their 401ks at least 10% from the very beginning before they have expenses. Do this stuff when you're 24, when your first paycheck, your first job making $40,000 is that's like $1 million to you. I mean, that's like $1 million to you because you've never seen $40,000, whatever your first job is. And doing that and being consistent about it and making it part of what you do.
And Teri, to that point, like just making it automatic, one of the most important books I read right at the beginning of my career was a book called The Automatic Millionaire. And I forget the name of the author, but I'll link it in the show notes. And he told a story about like $50,000 a year hairdressers, like who ended up saving their money and becoming a millionaire, in like their 40s or 50s, and then like having financial independence. And the automatic part is the most important. And for folks who have corporate jobs, this is much easier, I found, which is like you automatically set up your 401k to deduct. You automatically maybe have like some money go to like your checking account, and then another money going to kind of like the rainy day fund. Yeah. Or in your investment account. It's much different in this entrepreneurial world where it's like money comes to me and I have to like, so the automatic thing, if it's available to you, holy shit. Like that first time the paycheck comes out and it's like $200 going into your savings account, or even not that, it's kind of like, but you wake up 5 years later and it's like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. You're like, whoa, this thing works.
Yep. How did that happen? And then it compounds and then it grows. It's just amazing. But then for the entrepreneurs, most entrepreneurs pay quarterly taxes. It's just what you do. Yep. Why don't you do quarterly contributions to your investments as well?
Yep.
I mean, you know what your tax situation looks like for the quarter. Why not do that instead of, it's the end of the year and my CPA wants me to fund this account and I don't have the cash sitting around. I mean, it's easier to do it if it's more regular. But then most entrepreneurs have a roller coaster. I mean, it's a roller coaster.
Totally.
It's not steady and stable. And creating some systematic way of pushing dollars aside. And then a lot of entrepreneurs are building for the big payday, for the sale or and they're not doing anything along the way. And that works out in some cases. And in some cases it doesn't.
Yeah, that's
right.
And
what do you do when you're 42 and your business went under?
Yep.
And you're starting from zero.
Yep.
And you're horrified and you go and you take a corporate job because you have to. And you're like, oh my God, where am I now? So when you want to put it all on red and hopefully that works.
And you end up with the double zeros, the hate roulette. Yeah.
That happens.
These are great points, Teri. And, one question that Brian wanted me to ask, because he unfortunately couldn't make the episode here, was, should I even be thinking about investments when I have debt to pay off? And I mean, it sounds like the logical thing is like you would pay off your debt first before you invest, before you start saving. But is that always the case? It's
an expense question. Or an interest rate question. If your debt is at 17%, you sure better get rid of that.
Right.
If your debt's at 4%, it's a different question.
Yep.
So I encourage people to get out a paper, make a list of your debts and another column of the interest rates and another column of your minimum payments, total balances, whatever. And, Dave Ramsey does a thing called the debt snowball. It's like pay the little ones off first. You take the big interest rate. I don't always agree with that. I do think you should, if you work for a company, you should be trying to get your match and your 401k and other things. But it depends, and every situation is different. Like if you have so much debt that you're saying there's no way I'm going to pay this off within 10 years, and you're missing that 10 years of saving and compounding, there's probably a middle ground where you're doing a little bit of both.
Yep. So if you're talking about like, someone's got credit card debt that's racking up that 17% interest, taking like a real hard look at that, student loans that maybe have like a 4% interest rate. And now you're working for a company that matches you dollar for dollar on your 401k up to 8%. Like that's
free money.
That's free money. And so you might consider saving that, getting that free money, and then paying off the student loans later.
Correct.
Yeah, got it. One more question here for you, Teri, before we wrap would be, you were saying at the very beginning, some people are go it alone on their money stuff. And then there are other people who are like, okay, it's time to bring on a financial advisor to advise me. How does someone know if they benefit from hiring a financial advisor? And what are some of the questions they should be asking?
Well, I first would say the statistics say that women hire advisors more than men because men like to do things for themselves. There's an ego that comes with picking your stocks and running it yourself.
We don't do that.
But
guilty.
Women's performance is better than men's performance from an investment perspective. And it's because, let's look at this year. Let's go back to March when it was crazy when COVID started and market was down 35%. Everything was insane. I get more calls from male clients who don't know what to do. Should we sell? What should we do? I have harder conversations with the men who want to sell than I do with the women. And history says, let it ride. It's going to recover. It may not happen in 2 months, which it did this time.
Yep.
I had 2 clients sell everything at the bottom in late March against my real hard coaching. And they were both men.
Yep.
And they're both okay with it. Like now we're like, they're slowly getting back in. But men tend to feel more need to be in more control of it than their women counterparts often. Women also tend to be a little more conservatively invested than men, but they still outperform because they're more consistent. Their decisions seem to be a little more rational, just from, not to say that men are irrational, but there's the man who is investing on his own. It's a dinner party conversation. You're out having drinks with your buddy and you're like, oh, those shares of Apple or those shares of Workday or whatever it was that you bought that are doing so well. You don't tend to talk about the ones that didn't do well. So there's this lean towards talking about successes and not failures, right? Okay, so back to your question. If you're a hobbyist, and I mean like you track it, you're reading the news, you love markets, you're into the data, the tactical moves of industries and whatever. I mean, there is nothing wrong with doing it for yourself. And then I would say if you're young enough and in a consistent enough place where you've got your 401k plan, it's pretty basic. You generally don't need an advisor. When it gets to the point where the dollar figures start to feel like if a 10% move in the market keeps you up at night,
yep,
or you start questioning your own decisions, or you say, gosh, if I lost 10%, if I've saved $500,000 at this age, at 35, and I lose 10% and it keeps me up at night, it's probably time for you to hire a professional.
Yeah, got it.
So part of it is the keep you up at night. Do you make, I hate to use the word irrational because when you're making them, they don't feel irrational, but do you make sudden moves that in hindsight, you realize you shouldn't have made? Gosh, I shouldn't have sold, where you realize you're making emotional moves.
Yep.
That's when you should hire someone to kind of, if nothing else, to be your coach to keep you from making sudden moves. And then when the dollar figures get big enough to where you're like, kind of feels out of my wheelhouse, that's really when you need someone.
That's great guidance, Teri. When things are simple, like less complex, straightforward, then it's kind of like, hey, there's a lot of really good information out there that you can self-study. Dave Ramsey's program, Choose FI, get on a program, do the math. When life gets complex.
And that's really just the money part, because you've also got the taxes. When your taxes get complicated and you really need an advisor working with your tax advisor, or when your estate, you've got kids and like, how much insurance should I have? And have I managed my risks appropriately? Or if you're a business owner and you're coming up to a transaction, you
Yep.
see that something's going to happen, or even if your income is roller coaster and you need someone to kind of help moderate that for you. And if you're a corporate executive working for a company and you're getting options and deferred comp, and you've got some complicated stuff going on with how your compensation works, an advisor can really, and those aren't it's not the stock and bond part, but that's just the general life advice from, advisors like me can share experiences that other people have been through and compensation plans and complexities, and can help with some of to your point, when it gets more complicated than just put 15% of my 401k,
Right.
save $500 a month into my bank account, done. You don't need an advisor for that.
Right. And then I love the point that you made about like the self-awareness of, are you an emotional when it comes to your money? Can you see clearly when it comes to these decisions, or do you make these rash decisions that could bite you in the ass, like buying high, selling low? And like even having that awareness to say like, I could use someone during those times.
And usually those things go together. The dollar figures get higher and you start getting irrational, because when a 10% swing is $100,000.
Yeah.
People get fearful about trusting their own judgment.
Yeah. Teri, this has been great. I mean, we kind of hit a lot of mindset, money stuff, a lot of masculinity and identity stuff. Is there any like final point that you would either want to make or share with our audience before we wrap?
I am so happy that you're doing this work. So, and I appreciate you for working with the men in our world to make everyone stronger and make our men more rounded and making this world a better place, for lack of another phrase other than my Girl Scout phrase. You are making the world a better place for the women in this world. And I appreciate that work.
Well, thank you, Teri. That means a lot to me. And, one of the things that I have to thank you for is, you've been such an incredible supporter of this work. And you're the one who's out championing this to your team, to people in your community, spreading the word when my book comes out or a podcast comes out. And that says a lot because I hit some pretty, taboo topics and provocative subjects, and you work and live in a very conservative environment. And to be accepted by you, not just accepted, but super fan, you're the person who promotes more than anyone. That says a lot. So my ability to be impactful has a lot to do with you and putting that out there. So thank you for everything you've brought to me and to this show as well. All right. You know what time it is. It is the call to action. What is the one thing that you learned in this episode, the insight that you had, the aha moment that you're going to take and put into action in your life? Just listening to these episodes and then going off and devouring another episode is one way that you will get stuck in drift. You invested the last hour of your life, or if you put this on 2 times speed, half hour of your life, listening to this episode. What are you going to do differently as a result of it? And as always, bonus points for heading over to the Facebook group, The Great Man Within Podcast for men only, and sharing with us what win you've had by putting this practice into place. Hey, did you get something of value out of this podcast? If so, I'm going to ask you a favor. Would you be so amazing as to go over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and a review? Your ratings and reviews can show someone who's just discovered our podcast for the first time that we are worth listening to. And that way we can reach a wider audience. So please head over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review. You rock.